So welcome to another edition of Open for Business. I interview successful small business owners that are willing to share their tips and advice on how they got there. Today's topic is film and the entertainment industry in Georgia. Georgia has grown in the last decade from 240 million in 2007 to 9.5 billion with a B in 2017. Georgia is now the #1 filming location in the world, according to FilmL.A, and the industry has a giant impact on the state's economy. Today's guest will be talking about their latest film, Deadwater, which is scheduled to be released this July in Canada and October 4th, 2019 in the USA. We are so honored to have screenwriter Jason Usry to be with us here today to talk about your path. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Welcome to Open for Business.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Jason, it seems like everybody in Georgia is jumping on the bandwagon to be in the film industry. Give us an overview of your career path in this, from the time that you got interested till now.
Sure. When I was in high school, I always really enjoyed writing. I saw a little film called Titanic, which made a lot of money. It's a great film and everything. But the thing that really struck me was the way that the audience was relating to both the film and each other. I kind of realized that if I wanted to make an impact in a way that I could also utilize my passion for writing, it was as a screenwriter. So I had no idea what I was doing, so I just bought all the screenwriting books, downloaded screenplays from the internet, bought screenplays, at bookstores, and just read a lot of them. And then I got to college, initially started out at Thomas University in Thomasville, Georgia, as a business major, and then transferred in the first semester of my sophomore year to Valdosta State University. And I was in a business management class, and my professor called on me to answer a question, and I was busy handwriting a screenplay in a notebook. And I knew that I probably should just kind of go full force. And so I transferred into the media department, which at that time in Valdosta State, it was really more journalism focused. And but I had a couple of professors, an advisor named Mike Savoy, and a professor named Frank Barnes, who really allowed me to kind of expand that experience for my own. They ended up creating a screenwriting class that I got to take, and after quite a bit of convincing and trying to persuade, they allowed me to produce a short film that was called Chills. So I wrote, directed, and produced that, and I edited it. And then after college, I went and worked on a film called Saving Sophie that was shot in St. Augustine, Florida, by writer-director named Lorraine Portman. And that was a great experience. I started out as the second AD. The first AD had to take off for another job. And so I ended up stepping up into that role. It's an awesome experience. And then I had to make a decision as to what I wanted to really do after school. And I went home to my hometown of Cairo, Georgia. I looked in the newspaper and found a job at a TV station there in Tallahassee. So I worked there. And then in 2005, I moved to Savannah and ended up working in TV here. But I also could never stop writing screenplays. So just a few years ago, I know you're going to have Chris on at some point. Chris Helton and we met in 2008, 2009, and started write and develop projects together. And he hired me to work on a film at the time was called Take Two for Faith. It ended up being retitled Running for My Roots, that Chris Helton and Gabrielle Evans Fields produced. Nancy Chris directed, and it's kind of a family country music film. It was a really sweet spirit. So I worked on that with them, and then as that was in post-production, Chris came to me with an opportunity to develop a low-budget film, and we had an investor who was interested in putting some money in, but we didn't have any projects that really fit the budget that we needed. So he and I sat down at a Starbucks in Savannah and came up with some kind of brief ideas. Knowing what the money that we had to work with, we knew that we had to have limited cast, limited location. So Chris said, "Why don't we put them on a boat?" I said, "We'll put them on a boat." And then I went and developed a treatment from that, and we argued over different points of that for a couple of weeks, and then came to some agreements on everything. I went and wrote the screenplay, and then for Deadwater, yes, and then the investor dropped out, and so that project sat on the shelf for a little while, but Chris was able to secure the financing for it, and once that was in place, it was a very quick turn from when the money started to go into the bank to him going down. He shot it in St. Croix, the USVI, stars Casper Van Dien, Judd Nelson, Brianne Davis, and Griff First, and Chris also directed it as well. So he's done
the plot on that.
So essentially, it's a combat veteran returns home, is having a little difficulty reinserting back into civilian life. A good friend of his invites he and his wife. The main character's name is David Cooper. We refer to him as Coop. So Coop is invited by his good friend John. Coop and Vivian, Coop's wife, are invited out on a trip down in the Caribbean and this really beautiful yacht, and then some of the I don't know exactly how to call it, but there are some ulterior motives that are the reasons for that trip, and so there's a little bit of suspense and thrills.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's funny because a lot of people that have seen the trailer, which was released just recently, are saying it reminds them a lot of Dead Calm, which I actually never saw before I wrote this. So, and I actually still haven't seen it. So that's kind of an interesting thing. But yeah, it's a suspense thriller set on the high seas, and things are not as they seem between this group of people that are in these very cramped quarters. And it was a lot of fun to write because it's challenging when you can't write yourself out of a lot of situations on a boat. You're in a small location, so you really have to work with dialogue and create tension and the way that actors are relating to themselves and the camera and that sort of thing. And those are a lot of things that Chris did a really good job with the film. And yeah, it's a fun movie. It's a lot of fun.
When you write, I mean, did you have to go down there and experience being on that boat, or were you pulling from other experience?
It's actually funny. I do a lot of research, as much as I can do to try to create some sense of realism. With this specific project, we were looking initially at a different boat. And so Chris sent me the name and the model of the boat, and I went online and I downloaded the floor plan, and I kind of structured a lot of the choreography of my scenes around how, someone sneaking up on somebody, this is how it would have to happen, essentially. When they got down there, or right before they got down there, I guess, Chris had made a contact with some individuals who had this really nice yacht. The floor plan was very different. So Chris and I were actually on the phone quite a bit, talking through the how to kind of structure different scenes and work with different dialogue. To his credit, he made it a really great opportunity for me to be involved, even though I wasn't on the island with him. I was, I think, more involved than most writers get to be, even through post-production. We sat down one night in my house and watched a cut of the film and just made notes and the things that we wanted to see happen and do. And, some of that was like, this shot needs to be a half a second shorter or half a second longer, or those sorts of things. So it was a really cool experience from that standpoint. But the joke was that we would lock the script on the last day of the shoot because we just kept having to change a little bit here or there based on the way the scene is. Yeah.
But that's typical with any film.
I think I think that it's pretty typical to have rewrites. A lot of writers do get to go to set, and that's certainly hopefully in my plans to be able to be on set to help kind of mitigate some of these things that come up, because as Judd Nelson told me when we screened the film we screened it for Casper Van Dien, Judd Nelson, and Griff First back in November, just a rough cut. And Judd came to me and told me that he really liked the screenplay. He was so glad he got to work on it. And that some of the, he's like, I hope you didn't mind. We had to change a few things here and there because when you're on set, there are a couple things. There are text problems, which is a problem with the screenplay, and there are geographical problems, which is a problem with the physical space. And he's like, we had a lot of geographical problems based on, what we had initially written and had to kind of mold through. So I think it is common for screenwriters to have those moments on set, or someone to be continually kind of making things work as it goes along. But you do want to try to keep it somewhat close to where you are or what you wrote. So
Jason, being a screenwriter, how do you get your new business?
So the most important thing for me is just building relationships, and being very proactive about trying to any relationships that I have to keep those relationships really active, and then also finding opportunities to meet more people. For instance, I'm working on a project right now with Vincent DePaul, who is actually in Running for My Roots as an actor. He's producing a project with a gentleman by the name of Niraj Bindal. They're based out of Baltimore, or Niraj is. Vincent's, he's everywhere. But I met both of those guys in person at the American Film Market last year in November. And that's in Santa Monica, Los Angeles. It's the United States' largest film market. And we had initially gone out there. Chris and I were going out there to, the plan was to go out and sell Deadwater. We were just going to try to sell it ourselves. We had the good fortune of a company reaching out to us just before, a few weeks before AFM, who expressed an interest in representing us as our sales agents. So we ended up not having to do that. So we were able to just kind of network and meet people, and made some good contacts that way. But there's that. If I see something film related in an email or online that catches my interest, I'll go and I'll look at the website and I'll break down, look at who the team is and who the board is, if necessary, and reach out to people that way and see if I can find these, particularly if they're within driving distance of Savannah. I've got a lot of meetings in Atlanta that I'm trying to just knock down the logistics on for doing just that about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And then, also if I see something that catches my eye in terms of content or a story.
Would catch a screenwriter's eye?
It could be anything, books that, local authors have written, which is, I had a great meeting last week with a local author that we sat down about his project. He had already actually written the screenplay, but wanted me to take a look at it. So I'm going to help him develop that out. So it could be a book. It could be a news story, something interesting. It could be, really anything. I think that screenwriters may have their own kind of like genres that they want to focus in on, and so they're probably more attracted to those kinds of stories. And you take a piece of this story from here and a piece of that story from there and put it together, and you've got something that's completely original. Or if it's something that's a true story, then you might want to reach out to the people involved and see if they're interested in talking. And it may not be anything more than that they just want to talk about what happened to them or whatever. But as someone who is looking to tell stories and create that impact for a viewer, whether it's to educate them, inspire them, entertain them, whatever those things may be, I think you have to try to continue to expand your base of knowledge in as many ways as possible. And sometimes that means that you meet with somebody for several hours and nothing comes of it, and that's okay. You've gotten an experience there that you can then draw on, moving forward. So
you also have to keep in mind how easy it's going to be to get funded, right? I mean, are there some good stuff that have been looked over because you don't think the funding's going to come, or how does that work?
Absolutely. The film marketplace is very finicky and can change at a moment's notice. Typically, right now, the marketplace wants horrors, action thrillers, or family films. Dramas are really hard to sell unless you get big names. And same with comedy. Comedy is about the comedian that you like. So, you have to kind of keep those things in mind. For me, there are a lot of projects that I've written I don't believe will get, probably ever get funded. But for me to satisfy me as a writer, I just had to write them. But on the flip side of that, to sustain a business, you have to be willing to, find projects that you feel will be viable in the marketplace, and then build those relationships with talent agents or managers or whomever, so that you can try to get recognizable people attracted to that project, because if you attach big name talent or director or whatever to a project, you're more than likely going to be able to find the funding for it. Chris is really good on the financial side of the film world. He's done a lot of work. He knows what tax incentives are, and credits, rebates, basically from around the world. He can talk about all those things in depth. He's made a lot of relationships with companies that provide insurance to the film world, films, product placement. So he's actually done a really good job, because of the, from an independent standpoint, which is what we're aiming for. You have an investor or a group of investors who are putting up their money, and so you want to mitigate the risk for them as much as possible. and so that, there are a ton of factors that kind of come into account when you're trying to mitigate those risks.
And I would think a big factor now is in the state of Georgia, since 2008, there's huge incentives for people to produce films here.
Yes, yeah, there are a lot of the tax yeah, really, the tax credit's 30%. SAVANNAH has an additional incentive for if you hit certain benchmarks in terms of your budget and qualified spends.
Who would
there are a lot. I'm sorry, say that again.
SAVANNAH, who would people go talk to about getting those incentives?
They could talk to the film office at CETA. Beth Nelson is the head of that. They can get everybody set up with those things. I think that I think you have to have a qualified spend, and this is after it's audited. I think it's a qualified spend of $1 million. Hopefully I'm right about that. And there's a 10% additional incentive. That's on top of what you get from the state. So yeah, there are lots of incentives to not just shoot in Georgia, but also come to SAVANNAH and shoot, which is a big something that I'm very interested in, obviously interested in seeing as well.
Absolutely. So do you think these incentives will be continued in the state of Georgia? Is there any indication?
I haven't seen any indication of them being canceled. I think that the fact that the business has become such an economic driver, I think it would be really silly to take that away. I don't know what could fill its place, so I think that, as long as it remains viable industry here, I think that it'll stay. And I think that, Georgia has a lot to offer in terms of, virtually every scenic thing that you like. You've got beaches, you got mountains. You may not have snow-capped mountains, but you've got mountains. You've got obviously the woods and the forests and the agricultural, scenics that you could shoot. There's so many different things that you could shoot here. You've got the historic district in SAVANNAH. You've got buildings that were built in 1700. So there's so many different things, and I don't think the incentive's going to go away anytime soon.
Let's hope not. Too many people depend on these jobs. So let's switch gears about talking about tips as a writer. I mean, when you write, how do you set that up for success? I mean, do you write in the office right there, or do you write, how do you do that?
Yeah, so I have a little boy, so he's 2, and so I can't write all the time like I used to be able to write. Even though my wife is very good about keeping him out of my office if I need to. So I usually get up very early in the morning, or I stay up really late at night. But it's usually early in the mornings when I like to write. And sometimes I set an alarm and I write, and sometimes I'm awake at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. I can't sleep, so I just get up and I start then, and I write until 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning. And 95% of the time I write in this office. Sometimes I'll take my laptop downstairs, and usually when I'm doing that, I'm doing more of outlining or just notes.
With an outline?
What's that? Sometimes. Well, it kind of depends on the project. I've written projects where I sat down and I wrote from page 1 to page 110, basically in a straight shot over the course of a couple of days. I do tend to, working with more people now, as I'm working with different producers, I am typically at least writing a treatment, sometimes writing scene outlines, sometimes more broad-based outlines, but I'm usually at least writing a short treatment, which is, could be 5 pages, it could be 10 pages, but that's just to kind of give them an overall idea of what the story will be. And then I'll take that, and then I'll go and I'll write screenplay from that. That'll kind of be my guiding document. So yeah, a lot of times I will start, especially now. I used to, for the first I've probably written 25 screenplays in my life, and probably for the first 15 of them, I never wrote a treatment. It's only been in the last few years that I've started to do that, and again, that's because it's more
writing a treatment.
A treatment's basically kind of it's a narrative telling of the story the screenplay that you're going to write. So there's very little dialogue. It's really just sort of kind of a sketch of what you plan your story to be, with the major plot points and identifying who your heroes and villains are and that sort of thing. So it just kind of gives you a broad overview of where you're going to go. And I like to be able to discover when I'm writing a screenplay. So I may have one idea of something happening at this point in the screenplay, and when I get to that point in the screenplay, the characters are not that's not what they're telling me is going to happen, or the situation just doesn't work. So I like to have some flexibility when I'm writing so that I can capture these moments, because it should feel very organic. You still want to be surprised when you go to a movie. And so, sometimes you are surprised in the writing process. And I think that, those are kind of happy accidents that happen when you're putting something to paper, and should really, go with those things, because that's when I think you're really on to something, when you kind of get those surprises.
So what happens once you finish your own original screenplay? Do you sell it to somebody? How does that work? What's the next step?
So the first thing you do when you finish the screenplay, you want to make sure that you are, and you can do this with the treatment as well, you want to make sure that you protect it. So you register it with the Writers Guild. So there are two guilds. There's the Writers Guild East and the Writers Guild of America West. So I would recommend, it's like $25, I think, to register your screenplay for 5 years. So that's money well spent. Then also copywriting it is obviously a very good thing to do, just to protect your intellectual property. So that's your first step. Next step would be to look again with those relationships. If you have relationships with, have this relationship with some of the guys that, like with Casper Van Dien and those guys. So we would take a screenplay. We might take a screenplay I write and say, Chris, in particular, might say, hey, let me send it to his manager and see what he thinks about it and get his thoughts. So leveraging those contacts. What's that?
With scripts?
Say that one more time. You broke up.
Are they bombarded with scripts?
Oh yeah. I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure they are. It's I think it's a constant thing, because they're also looking for their next job, that, something that speaks to them. And also, going back to the relationship, I'm talking a lot about relationships, but, being someone that's flexible and excited and positive, people are drawn to that. So a lot of times, whether it's talent or a director, you'll see a lot of the same people in the same movies. A lot of times, or the same director will have the same cinematographer, or the same composer for the score or whatever. It's because they found people they can work together with, and that's a really important thing. So I would say then, after you're protected, you leverage your relationships to see. It's very, 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 very difficult to get into a studio and sell your screenplay. I haven't done it. I've done everything independent. But there are ways to attract attention to what you're doing, whether it's, marketing yourself in ways like this or social media. You can put your screenplay in contests. Excuse me. which I've had some success with. So that's always a good thing to kind of put on your resume. Um, and yeah, from an independent standpoint, it's kind of okay. The screenplay's done now. Let's budget it. Let's see where we stand. How much money we need to produce it. Let's schedule it. See how many days we're going to have, which will relate back to the budget. And then let's try to, either raise the money ourselves via an investor or group of investors, or let's look at programs that we could get it financed. And again, Chris would be much more suited to talk about those items, just because he's really worked on some strong strategies and processes for that. Yeah, but that's kind of the way that I would say it's. I mean, it's a grind. It's not a very quick and easy thing. But I think that it's enormously satisfying when you see an actor, interpret your words in the scene in the way that you saw in your head, or you see something new that they've brought to it that you didn't expect but you love. That's really, it's a really, really cool thing to see.
So Jason, what's next on the horizon for Jason Usry?
Well, there are a few projects. Like I mentioned before, I've got a project I'm working with some folks out of DC, Baltimore area. I've got a follow-up to Running for My Roots, which will go into production next January. With that, I think that we're going to shoot that in Los Angeles, I think, because Gabrielle Evans Fields with Silver Lining Pictures is producing that, and that's where she's based. That's where all the actors that she has are based. But Chris and I have a couple projects that we are trying to develop for to produce locally. One of them is a project that is low country themes, like South Carolina low country theme, but we would shoot it on this side of the river because it, obviously the incentives are very good. But we're working on trying to get that kind of nailed down and squared away. So that's a project. I've got another couple of projects that are out being reviewed by talent right now. This project with this local author that I met with last week, I'm very, very excited about that. He's a guy with a can-do attitude and a will-do attitude, and that's really important because I think a lot of people want to talk about doing this, and sometimes you just have to get out and do it. So those are kind of the immediate things for me. I've got a notebook full of 50 ideas, 3 or 4 of which I would love to finish by the end of the year. That's not going to happen just because I have all these other projects that are going on. But if I could get 1 or 2 of those done, I'd feel really accomplished. And those are all projects that could be shot, well, 3 of the 4, or 2 of the 4, I guess technically, could be shot here in Savannah. One of them is set in Montana, and so that's kind of Montana. The Montana landscape is kind of a character in that one, so I would want to shoot that one there. And one of them is probably one of the ones that will never get produced. It's a World War II movie that I've been outlining for 5 years that I really, really jazzed about writing. So yeah, there are a lot of things, cooking on that side. You can rest assured that I'll be spending many early mornings right here at this computer working on these projects. So yeah.
Jason, if anybody watching has any questions about the film industry, screenwriting, how can they get in touch with you?
My email is the best, jasonusry@gmail.com. That's JASONUSRY@gmail.com. I'm happy to offer any insight that I can, And again, it's always good to just meet people that want to create and tell their story, tell their own stories, or tell stories that get them really excited about getting out of bed in the morning. So, so yeah, I'm open to any sort of emails that anybody wants to send.
Well, I just want to congratulate you and Chris
Thank you.
for all your success. You're making Savannah very, very proud.
Thank you, Marjorie.
So keep up the great work, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you so much. Thank you.